Picture this, February 1924, Oregon's Cascade Mountains. 3 expert trappers vanished from their cabin near Little Lava Lake without a trace. No signs of a struggle, no explanation, just empty coffee cups, a cold stove, and strange tracks in the snow. But days later, searchers make a discovery so disturbing that even a century later, the case remains still open. So what happened in those remote woods? And why do the Deschutes County Sheriff still investigate reports of strange shadow moving beneath the ice? Well, I guess you're gonna have to listen to the end to know why. So let's go. What's going on, Midnight Mafia? I just wanted to pop in real quick to let you guys know, check the channel every Thursday and Saturday. That's all you gotta do. Alright, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Okay, so imagine the winter of 1924, because I'm sure you probably weren't there. Because it wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that made old-timers shake their heads and, mutter about bad omens. The kind of cold that could freeze a pot of coffee solid in minutes and then turn your breath into icy crystals before it even left your mouth. But for Edward Nichols, everyone in the little town of Bend called him Ed. This was just another, season in the mountains that he had called home for nearly 20 years. Because you see, Ed, he wasn't your average trapper, no. At 35, he was the kind of woodsman that other trappers talked about with reverence in their voices. Like, Ed, they'd say, that man could track a ghost through a snowstorm. And the folks that lived in Bend still tell stories about the time Ed tracked down a wounded bear for 3 days through the worst blizzard of 1922. That's a real story. And he did it just because he couldn't stand the thought of leaving an animal out there to suffer. And he found it too, and he put it out of its misery clean and quick. And that's just the kind of man that Ed was, skilled, sure, but also decent to his core. His buddy, Roy Wilson, who was also 35 years old, had been working these mountains for almost as long as Ed. Roy had this, way about him. It was quiet, watchful, the kind of man who could read the weather like most folks read the morning paper. Other trappers, swore by his instincts, Roy's getting that look, they'd say, when he's gazing up at the sky in a certain way. Storms are coming, and sure enough, within a day or two, the snow would always start falling. And then there was Dewey Morris. And he was just 25 years old. But don't let his age fool you for a second. Dewey had the kind of natural talent that made veteran trappers shake their heads in amazement. The other woodsmen said that Dewey could walk his way through fresh snow without leaving a trace, like a ghost moving throughout the wilderness. And he had learned from Ed and Roy, sure, but the kind of instincts he had you just couldn't teach. The kind that keep you alive when the mountains turn mean. So that winter, the 3 of them had set themselves up for a prime spot near Little Lava Lake. Now their cabin, once they got there, wasn't much to look at. Just a simple 1-room affair with a pot-bellied stove and enough space for the 3 men to live without, getting on each other's nerves too much. But the location was worth its weight in gold. Far enough out to avoid any competition from all the other trappers, but not so remote that they couldn't make regular trips into Bend to, sell their furs and stock up on supplies. A woman by the name of Martha Thompson ran the little cafe in Bend back then, and she always, kept a pot of coffee hot and waiting for Ed and the boys. She said they were the best trappers in the whole territory. And she would say it to literally anyone who would listen. Ed and those partners of his, they know what they're doing out there. She had their routine down pat. Every few weeks, the little bell above the door would ring right around sunrise, and there they would be, their beards still frozen from the morning cold. You see, they had a system themselves all worked out. They'd run their trap lines in this real careful pattern, Ed taking the north route, Roy heading south, and Dewey worked the area closest to the cabin. Then every evening they would all meet back at the cabin, process, whatever they had caught for the day, and then plan out the next day. I mean, seriously, folks in that town said you could set your pocket watch by the smoke from their cabin chimney, always lit right at sunset, always burning steady through the night, like clockwork, which is exactly why old Otto Herring couldn't shake a bad feeling that settled in his gut that particular February morning. Now, you gotta understand, Otto had been hunting and trapping in these mountains for over 30 years. And he knew what normal looked like out there. And he sure as hell knew what wrong looked like as well. And what he was seeing right then, that was kind of wrong. You see, the air was dead still that morning, and bitter cold, the kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe it in too deep. I'm sure you have felt that if you've lived anywhere that has seasons. And Otto had been out, checking his own trap lines when he first spotted it, or rather spotted what wasn't there. No smoke, you see. Not even a wisp rising from the chimney of Ed's cabin. Now, in weather like this, you never, and I mean you never, let your cabin fire go out. It's just, not about comfort either. It's about survival. So he just kind of stood there for, a long moment just watching. Usually you'd hear something, maybe the sound of somebody chopping some wood or voices carrying through the crisp morning air. The everyday sounds of men just going about their work. But there was nothing. Just the soft crunch of snow under Otto's boots and the sound of his own breathing. And that's when he noticed the tracks. And if he had any doubts that something was wrong before, well, those tracks had wiped him clean away. You see, Otto knew what normal tracks around a trapper's cabin ought to look like. Neat little paths between the cabin and the wood pile, clear trails heading out to check the trap lines, but these were different. These tracks, they literally went everywhere, crisscrossing each other like whoever made them had been searching for something or running from something. And he could tell they were old, partially filled in with fresh snow, which meant nobody had been there in days. So Otto, kind of felt his stomach tighten up because in all the years in these mountains, he had never seen anything quite like this. "Ed!" he called out, as he was approaching the cabin, his voice sounding strange in the frozen air. "Roy, Dewey!" No answer. Just more of that heavy, loaded silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's got something to hide. That's when he goes up the steps to the cabin door. He kind of looks in, doesn't see anything, and the door is unlocked. Now, if you're around from those parts back in that time, that might not seem like much. But up here, you always lock your doors. Not because, you're worried about thieves from the town over. Good luck finding anything worth stealing in a trapper's cabin, but because a locked door keeps the curious critters out. These boys knew better than to leave a door unlocked like that. Just think of things like bears, other things that would literally open doors if they were unlocked. And it's happened. It happens a lot. And then once he kind of went inside the cabin and shut the door behind him, inside it just felt wrong. Everything was there, sure, the boys, the heavy winter coats that were hanging by the door, stiff with frost, and their supplies were still sitting on the shelves. Coffee cups were on the table, frozen solid. Ed's favorite pipe laying right there where he always left it, right next to his bunk. And it was all their day-to-day things that were just laid out like they had just, maybe stepped out for a minute. But two things caught old Otto's eye right away. First, the stove was cold, stone cold, hadn't had a fire in it for days. And second, and maybe most importantly, the two rifles were missing from the rack. Now, back in 1924, no trapper worth his salt would go anywhere without his rifle slung around his back. But if Ed and the boys had taken their guns, why leave everything else behind like that? So Otto, he didn't waste another minute. He hightailed it straight back to town to raise the alarm. Within a couple hours, the Deschutes County Sheriff's Department was putting together these search parties. And word spread through Bend at that point like wildfire. These weren't just any missing folks. These men were people that everyone knew. Men who knew these mountains better than they knew their own homes. Let that truly sink in. And the search that followed was unlike anything that little corner of Oregon had ever seen. Volunteers from town joined up by the dozens. Members of the Warm Springs tribe, who knew the ways around the woods better than anybody, stepped up to help as well. And they checked every single trap line, every possible route that Ed and his partners might have taken. But the snow, it had been coming down on and off for days at this point, and it kept covering up any trail that might have been there. Another man named Jim Barrett had been a part of plenty of search parties before. Lost hikers, travelers who got turned around in the storm, he'd helped find them all. But something about this search, it felt different. It felt almost impossible. Maybe it was the way that the cabin had been left, with everything in its place but the men who lived there. Maybe it was one of those odd tracks in the snow. Or maybe it was just that sinking feeling in Jim's gut that something had gone terribly wrong. So he was out searching on Little Lava Lake with Mike Thompson when they first spotted it. The ice was good and thick enough definitely to walk on. It had to be in weather like this. So Jim, stopped kind of dead in his tracks, grabbing Mike's arm. "Hey," he said, pointing at something dark down there under the ice, maybe about 30 yards out. He said, "You see that?" So they moved in closer, each step really careful on that frozen surface. Could be nothing, Jim, told himself. Could be an old log that got trapped when the ice froze over. Could be some kind of debris. Could be anything. But with every step, that little flicker of hope got dimmer and dimmer. And that sick, twisted feeling in Jim's stomach got stronger. Now, what happened next is the kind of thing that changes a man. Because you see, they had to go and cut through that ice, inch by painstaking inch. The whole time they are hoping and praying that they are wrong about what they're going to find under there. But they weren't wrong. The first body that they found that was that, black spot under the ice, well, it was Roy Wilson. But that wasn't the end of it. As they widened out that hole in the ice, they found Ed Nichols too, and then young Dewey Morris. All three of them right there, trapped under this sheet of ice. But this wasn't some terrible accident. These men hadn't just fallen through and drowned, because each one of them had been shot multiple times. And there was more. Signs of a struggle. Evidence of severe injuries. So this wasn't just the wilderness claiming these men. This was something far more sinister. And whoever was responsible for this had gone to considerable trouble to hide what they'd done beneath the ice of Little Lava Lake. And the investigation that followed ended up bringing more questions than answers. It was clear that the bodies, had been moved. They surely didn't die where they were found. But the cabin didn't show any signs of struggle or a fight. And three experienced woodsmen don't just up and walk out into a winter night without good reason. In the sheriff's department, they looked into every possible explanation that they could think of. Maybe it was a robbery. Wait, nothing was missing from that cabin except those 2 rifles. Maybe it was a dispute over trapping territory. But there'd never been any bad blood over that before. So they talked to every single soul who had any contact with Ed or his partners in those last couple of weeks. They traced every last step that those men had taken in Bend. They chased down every lead, no matter how thin. The same snow and ice that kept those bodies preserved also wiped away any tracks, any sign that might have pointed to what really happened that night. Whatever occurred at that little cabin near the lake, whatever it was that led those 3 men to end up beneath the ice, it stayed buried, out there in the cold and the dark. Trappers started working in bigger groups, always watching each other's backs. No one, and I mean no one, wanted to be out there in the woods alone anymore. I mean, not after what happened to Ed, Roy, and Dewey. Remember, these 3 men were just about the best as you could get as trappers, and everybody knew and liked them and trusted them. Their gut instincts were truly something else. So for all 3 of them to share this fate makes no sense. But the story didn't end in 1924. Last year, in February 2024, 100 years later, a fisherman named Mark Hensley stood on that frozen lake, drilling a hole for his line. and he swears he saw something. A shadow that was too large for any fish, and it was moving rapidly beneath the ice, right where those bodies were discovered a century ago. It's still down there, he told the Bend Bulletin, voice trembling. Whatever happened to those men, I don't think it's finished. The sheriff investigated but found nothing conclusive. Yet the case remains open, unsolved since that brutal winter. On the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the ice groans like it's alive, folks say that you can feel it. That same dread that Otto felt, staring at an empty cabin. Out there in the vast, frozen darkness, something awaits. Was it a human conflict that ended in horrible tragedy? Or was it something beyond ordinary explanation? Because Little Lava Lake, it holds its secrets very close. And after even 100 years, the truth about what happened to those three very experienced trappers remains as elusive as ever. So if you go visit Little Lava Lake, look down at the ice and be aware that if you walk on it, it might be your last steps. Do you like gut-wrenching tension that has you on the edge of your seat and waiting for a final twist? Well, if you do, this story is for you. And Deadmont's fiery arguments fueled by alcohol always ended with her recklessly driving off into the night. It had become a routine for her husband Roger, who would wait for her to return after she had calmed down a bit. But on that fateful night of March 1st, 1967, Anne never came back. And the next morning, Roger received the devastating news that his wife's lifeless body was found in the middle of the highway between Union, South Carolina, and Spindale, North Carolina. And just like that, Roger went from being an innocent bystander to the prime suspect in his own wife's murder. And despite maintaining his innocence, he was ruthlessly sentenced to 18 years in Union County Prison Camp. And after this, the calm and quiet evening on February 8th, 1968 was shattered by the shrill ring of Bill Gibbons' phone. With trembling hands, he answered the call, only to hear a distorted voice claiming to be the killer of Ann Deadmont. And this caller gave chilling details about the crime and then ominously instructed Gibbons on where to find 2 more bodies. And despite his disbelief, Gibbons couldn't ignore this lead and immediately alerted the authorities, heart racing as he feared for the safety of the victims and the identity of this twisted killer if true. So the officers at this point follow this cryptic instructions to an isolated spot near Peoples Creek Bridge. There, they found the lifeless body of 20-year-old Nancy Paris, reported missing by her frantic husband just a day before. But as they searched the area, they came upon another gruesome discovery: the strangled body of 14-year-old Nancy Reinhardt, missing for a harrowing 10 days. And the corpses bore evidence of torture, with countless cigarette burns etched into their skin. It was then revealed that Reinhardt had been held captive for a nightmarish 10 days before meeting her tragic fate. But the terror was far from over. On February 12th, 1968, Bill Gibbons received another chilling phone call from this deranged killer who confessed to the murders and ominously threatened more deaths if they don't catch him. And sadly, but true to his word, the very next day, 15-year-old Opal Buxton was snatched off the street in broad daylight as her younger siblings watched in horror from afar. And Opal was tossed into this blue sedan, leaving behind only fear and devastation for those who saw it happen. It was at this point that Opal's brother frantically raced home, his heart pounding in his chest as he dialed their father's phone number. But when Emmanuel Buxton arrived at the scene, the blue sedan had already been gone, leaving only Opal's school books strewn across the blacktop as a chilling reminder of her abduction. At this point, a massive search was launched for the missing girl, with every passing hour filled with terror and desperation. 2 days later, on February 15th, two civilian volunteers, Theodore Lang and Frank Henders, were scouring a deserted rural road when they spotted a man loitering next to a blue sedan. And as soon as he saw them looking at him, the man hastily leapt into his car and then sped off. But not before Henders managed to jot down his license plate number. The police were immediately notified and an intense search ensued near that area. Finally, their efforts unfortunately paid off. Opal's lifeless body was discovered, brutally stabbed and bearing the same telltale cigarette burns as the other victims. But the investigators wasted no time in tracing the license plate to its owner, a 30-year-old man named Leroy Martin. Martin then was placed under constant surveillance as the police meticulously built up their case against him. This weight of the upcoming arrest hung over him like a dark cloud, suffocating and paralyzing. And finally, on a seemingly ordinary day at work, Martin's world came crashing down as he was handcuffed and dragged away to finally face justice. After just 2 days, he cracked under pressure and confessed to all the brutal killings. Now, despite being convicted and sentenced to 4 life sentences, Martin would only spend less than 3 years behind bars. But wait, there's a reason for that. Because his time in prison would be cut short when on May 31st, 1972, fellow inmate Kenneth Rumsey stabbed him to death in a vicious dispute over the affections of another prisoner. And no worries, because Roger Deadman, who was originally given 18 years for a crime he did not commit, was released after serving 1 full year in jail. This time, the true perpetrator met his end while the innocent man made it out of jail alive. But remember, that's not always the case. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to check out Saturday's episode as well. But if you want to watch something that's maybe even crazier than this, and I'm serious, take a look at this story right here and it'll absolutely blow your mind. The ending, I'm telling you, chef's kiss. I love you guys. That's all I got for you today. I'll see you next time. Cheers.